A Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has been speaking to GBNews, and it comes as the Rwanda Bill is once again being debated this afternoon, with a vote happening later this evening around 8 p.m, we believe. And Labour set out its plans on how they would deal with illegal migration.
Well, we need to strengthen our border security and fix the chaos in the asylum system, because under the Conservatives we've really seen criminal gangs take hold along the Channel, and then this huge soaring backlog with asylum hotel use that is costing the taxpayer billions. So instead of all the gimmicks that we've had from Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives, our plan is to get a grip. That starts with the new cross-border police to go after the criminal gangs, to smash the gang networks and prevent boats arriving on the French coast in the first place. And then it also means setting up a new returns and enforcement unit, because the returns of failed asylum cases have dropped by 40% since the Conservatives came to power. That means the rules aren't being enforced. We've got to get a grip of that, and that would be part of our plan to clear the backlog, to end asylum hotel use, and also to save the taxpayer billions of pounds as well.
So you'll save billions of pounds through not having people staying in hotel rooms and the like, but what will it cost you, this new 1,000-strong returns and enforcement unit?
Well, the new returns and enforcement unit would likely cost in the tens of millions of pounds, but it would be part of this plan that would actually save the taxpayer billions of pounds, because at the moment the Conservative Home Office has actually bust their budget by more than £5 billion. Some of that is around the asylum hotels, some of this is around the Rwanda scheme, which is only going to cover less than 1% of those arriving in the country, to the cost of around £2 million per asylum seeker, and that is the British taxpayer writing those cheques just as part of the gimmicks instead of getting a proper grip.
I think I know you'll say this, but are you saying you would axe the Rwanda Bill, the plan, even if it works?
Well, when you've got a scheme that is costing around £500 million to cover, we thought it was going to cover around 300 people. What we hear now in the news that it's only likely to cover around 150 people. Well, you have more people arriving on boats sometimes in a day than that. This is way less than 1%. And this is a failing scheme. All they're trying to do is to get some symbolic flights off before a general election. Those are the words, not my words, but the words of the former immigration minister, Robert Jenrick, who said that's all they're trying to do. And all they're trying to do now is also to try and pay volunteers to fill those flights, because they've got themselves into such a mess. And that's why I think this just has to be about getting a grip instead. So yeah, we would use that money, instead of putting it into the Rwanda scheme, to putting it into strengthening our border security instead. Let's actually start to tackle some of the problem at source and go after those criminal gangs that are making a fortune from putting lives at risk and undermining our border security.
If it works, though, and maybe thousands are taking off before the November election, even then you might axe it?
Well, the Court of Appeal says it's going to be about 100 people. The current immigration minister has said a few hundred. The former immigration minister said 200. The briefing from the Home Office said 150 people. You know, look, 80,000 people applied for asylum last year in the UK. 2,000 people have arrived in the winter months. We do have to have action to stop these dangerous boat crossings that are putting lives at risk and are undermining our border security. So there's got to be a proper plan to go after the criminal gangs. But, you know, this Rwanda scheme has so far sent more Home Secretaries than asylum seekers to Rwanda, and I think it's just all about headlines and gimmicks. What we want to see is a proper plan to get a grip.
Your unit's called a returns and enforcement agreement. What's the returns bit mean? You can't do a deal, can you, with EU countries? You've got to talk to the EU first.
Well, there's a series of things we need to do. So this has got to be about getting new return agreements in place, and that includes working internationally in order to do that, but also doing the basic casework around individual cases who actually should be being returned at the moment. So the Independent Borders Inspectorate did an inquiry that looked at, for example, the returns of foreign national offenders, found huge failures just in the bureaucracy, in the technology that they were using. At one point he used the phrase, "This is no way to run a government." Well, I agree with that. This is no way to run a government, and that's why you've got to sort out those systems. So that's why we're saying additional staff in the returns unit to actually make sure that where people have no right to be in the UK, then they are being swiftly returned.
But can you get deals with, say, France or other individual EU nations, or must you go via Brussels?
So we do want to work with France, with other European countries. There used to be agreements that did mean that some people were returned to other European countries. None of that's been happening. That sort of totally collapsed, even though the government promised it would happen. It hasn't happened at all. But I think this is also about recognising the other safe countries across the world that people should be being returned to, and making sure that the rules are being enforced. It did happen. We had much higher levels of returns under the last Labour government. So that's why we know it can be done if you're just really practical about this.
And perhaps before Brexit too, don't forget. In terms of quotas, that's the idea has been mooted. 100,000 migrants from the EU come here. Is that a thing you're looking at, the quota idea?
No, we won't be part of the EU member states quota scheme. We've been very clear about that. We're not an EU member state. We're not going to be an EU member state. Brexit is done, and we're not going to be part of that EU member state quota scheme. There has been a lot of stuff made up about this by the Conservatives, who I think are just trying to distract from the fact that they are failing. They are really badly failing, and it is letting people down. It's undermining our border security. It's putting lives at risk. It's also just costing the taxpayer billions of pounds. They're letting the country down. And all we get from them is rhetoric, headlines, and attempts to blame someone else. We need to get a grip.